This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 42, September 3rd, 2019. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and my guest for this episode is Derk Jan Hartman, also known as DJ appropriately enough, or by his username, which is TheDJ, who is a software developer in the Netherlands. He's also the first true volunteer MediaWiki developer we've had on this show, i.e. someone who doesn't work for the Wikimedia Foundation or otherwise work on MediaWiki for his job. We came close before with Derek Alangi a few months ago. He was a volunteer when I interviewed him, although by the time the episode aired, he was already working for the Wikimedia Foundation. But Derk Jan is the real thing, an actual volunteer, and I'm excited to have him on the show. So, Derk Jan, welcome to the program.
Hello. Good to be here.
Great. Where do you live?
I live in a city called Enschede in the Netherlands.
Yeah. So how did you get started with MediaWiki programming?
It's a bit of a long story, I guess. I
Sure.
started back in 2004, 5-ish. I was doing some edits on Wikipedia. And I did that for a couple of years, just very low-key, like many people do, I think, like just doing some spelling corrections, writing some small pieces. Yeah. And then around 2007, I noticed ever more things with these templates and the JavaScript and the CSS that was going on the website. And because of my background as a developer, I started tinkering with all these things. And eventually started tinkering more and more and more, and all of a sudden I was a core developer, and we're 13 years along, yeah, something like that.
Okay, well that was a short way to describe it.
It's the shortest way possible.
Do you remember at what point you switched from writing template code or gadgets or whatever to actually writing PHP? Back-end PHP code?
I think that was only around 2010 that I started doing that. I know that in something like 2008, 2009, I was working on the mobile website version of Wikipedia, which back then was actually in a different language. It was Ruby, if I remember correctly.
Oh, wow.
It was basically a proxy service that serialized Wikipedia content and transformed it into something that was suitable for mobile devices.
Oh, I see. It was read-only, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was working a little bit on that, partly because I had some knowledge about the web protocol, WAP.
Right.
Which was in there, and I was like helping the primary developer, who was Hampton Catlin, for that, and so that was basically my introduction to a different level of MediaWiki development than the on-wiki development that I was doing with the JavaScript and the CSS, the user scripts, those kinds of things. So that was my first real work outside of core, if I remember correctly. And then soon after that, in 2009, 2010, I started doing core work. Anything basically that came on my path that was interesting to me in that regard.
Yeah, okay. Backtracking a little, before you did MediaWiki, I understand you were involved in working on the VLC Media Player, which is an open source video playing application. For those who don't know, I'm sure it's still very popular, although it used to be...
Oh, yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it used to be pretty much you had to have it, unless you were on an Apple maybe, but back before there was YouTube and the rest, if there was a video online, someone just put a link to it and you had to download it yourself and play it in some way.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, that's...
Yeah, that's basically where I would not say started with development, but it was very early on. I think so. I started studying university in 1999, late 1999.
Yeah.
And almost immediately involved with open source software development.
Oh, okay.
And VLC Media Player was one of those things that came on my path where we were, well, you know how it went those days. All the content going around on the universities, movies, films, software. Sure. So I needed on my Mac a way to watch a DVD. And that was simply not possible back then. It was just after Mac OS X came to the Mac.
Oh, okay. And
I was looking for a solution for that, and I couldn't find anything. And at some point, I came across this VLC, VLC Media Player. It didn't have the media player; it was just VLC back then. And they were the only ones who had made MPEG decoding working on a Mac, but it was very bare bones, very basic, and but it sort of worked. And so I was starting to use that to play back my videos, and I ran into some problems like, okay, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and I would love to have this, but it's not there right now. And I was, I'm not going to say badgering the developers, but it was like reaching out to the developers, like, guys, it would be really cool if it had this feature. And they were like, here's the code, try it yourself. So that's one of the that's how I got involved in that project. And I for a couple of years there, I maintained the macOS version of VLC Media Player.
Oh, okay, wow.
And then later on, I focused more on specific plugins for VLC Media Player. So early on, it was like the user interface up until 2004, and then afterwards 2004 till I think 2008-ish. I worked more on the modules like subtitling and some other core plugins, and I believe the MP4 format and a couple of things.
Cool.
So yeah.
Yeah, for some reason I thought it was like a Windows-only thing, and on Mac there was QuickTime and all that stuff. But I guess there's so many video formats that
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's also why it became popular, right? Because it had all these video formats supported in one simple player.
Yeah.
You just downloaded it and it worked, and you could even put it on a USB stick and use it on all those computers that were restricted. And would not allow you to install software.
I see.
It was a perfect solution back then.
Not that you did that kind of thing.
No, not that I did that kind of thing, but it was possible.
Right. How deep did you get into the internals of encoding and all these formats and stuff?
Well, I mean, I was never really proficient at the whole audio and video codec stuff. Because that gets pretty technical pretty quickly.
Right.
But I made patches on those things. I was more focusing myself on the file formats that were wrapping the codecs and all the additional functionality that is required in order to do more advanced playback. Also things like very simple, but the entire build system that was required to create the Mac version, for instance, was a huge, complex system back then, and that simply required a lot of attention, a lot of effort. So I was very much involved in those areas, and like I said, subtitling was a big part. I implemented like a teletext, which is a teletext service for.
Oh, wow.
So you could actually decode the teletext services in Europe, mostly for TV streams.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, was a paid project back then. Okay. I was involved in many areas of it, all over the place. Also, a lot of user support. But it's a long time ago. I stopped doing that around 2008 or something.
Yeah. Okay. Although I guess this is a good transition to MediaWiki stuff, because from what I understand, you're also involved with video stuff to some extent now.
Yes.
MediaWiki.
Yeah, I've actually, because of that background, I've always had a interest in the video parts. So even in 2010-11, when we were switching from the very old playback engine we had to a newer one, I was already involved as a volunteer. Back then, it was one of the first projects that the bigger projects that the foundation actually ran. It was Upload Wizard, Wiki Editor, and the video player were some of the first software projects other than basic maintenance that the Wikimedia Foundation launched. And I followed that actively because of my interest with video. And that transitioned into what I'm also involved with now, is that that playback engine is now 8 years old. And we've been looking into replacing it, and the foundation simply has not had time to put dedicated effort into completely replacing that. And I've contributed some of my time to help that along. Luckily, now the foundation is helping with that again since the last year, and we're pretty close actually to switching to a newer generation of web playback.
Yeah, okay. You're talking about the transition from something called Kaltura to VideoJS.
Yeah. So Kaltura is the playback layer that we were using and that we created together with the Kaltura company in 2010 and 2011, something like that. And now we're going. That was way before many of the video parts on the web had become standardized. And since then, HTML5 video has been coming up. There's a lot more possibilities in the browser now, and we've chosen a different technology, which is Video.js, which is used by many big players online, and our hope is to switch to that engine and that in the long run will be easier to maintain and easier to add functionality to as well, for instance. But the problem has been that we had so much old content and old structures that slowly needed moving towards this newer direction with changes to the output of the HTML, which at the Wikimedia level can be quite difficult sometimes to achieve, because you have to account for caching layers and logged in users, without users. Comes with a whole range of issues. And for instance, subtitling specifically, we used a technology which was subribs, SRT subtitling, and of that a MediaWiki specific variant.
Oh, right.
And that's completely not supported by modern browsers. So we had to create a way to get that old content into a newer form, which is supported by browsers, or at least by most browsers. And something like that can sometimes takes a long time, especially for a volunteer like me.
Well,
when you don't have the full machine of Wikimedia behind you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. On the other hand, sometimes development can move faster if it's just one person.
Yes. So, well, I mean, this is a typical example to some degree of that. Like it took me a weekend at a hackathon to create the first version of that video player, and it's taken me 4 years to get it deployed on Wikimedia.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Right. So it's one of those things where if this is also what I like doing. I like picking things that the foundation is actually not working on and exploring that and trying to see if we can bring value there. But it's basically a death trap for myself sometimes, because when you don't have the full support of a lot of employees, some of these technologies can be pretty hard to roll out to the Wikimedia websites. It's a big thing that we all are using with Wikimedia, with Wikipedia, and all the different versions of it, especially. You have to take in a lot of different constraints that as a as an outside developer, you might sometimes not take into account.
Yeah. So I mean, what accounts for that 4-year delay? Is it just a matter of getting the software, deployment ready?
It's multiple things. It's getting it deployment ready, getting the quality to the level that is required with translations and all these things, right?
Sure.
Something that we don't forego in Wikimedia, but in many situations where you would personally develop something for yourself, you would just like, okay, let's just roll with this and deal with all the problems later. That's simply not possible in Wikimedia. Other things have been like trying to agree with multiple people on what is this the next thing? Are we going this direction? Do we want to use VideoJS or do we want to use something else? And just trying to get an agreement on that is already a long process. And then, especially like I was saying, changing the HTML format, and suddenly you have the parser, and then we introduced a new parser, Parsoid. So suddenly you need to get agreement with 2 parsers instead of one.
Oh yeah, right.
Which are split over multiple teams at the foundation. Fun things like that.
Yeah, but you've gotten everyone to agree now. I mean,
I think that we've sort of reached the point where everybody is like, this is the best we can do with no dedicated team of the foundation. Because there's no team at the foundation working specifically on multimedia elements. This is mostly, even with the foundation employees that are now contributing to this, it's either a volunteer effort or it's Brian Faber, who's the one other person working on this and who's actually works on this with the permission of the foundation out of his day job. But it can be a little bit hard sometimes to move that machine forward.
Yeah. Have you had to get involved with the video.js people, by the way, out of curiosity? I mean.
Oh yes. I've especially in the initial stages when there were some problems I ran into with the software, and I think I reported several bugs to them, and maybe I even contributed a couple of patches, I believe, to fix some of those issues. Because of course, like always, we need to do things differently with Wikimedia, and because we don't use HTML video, we use codecs which are open source and open formats as well, which is not something that the web video currently is. So we've had to create some software decoders, which Brian has been doing. He created software decoders in JavaScript that do this decoding. And that required integration with VideoJS. And because not so many people were using that layer yet of their software project, we ran into a couple of problems that needed addressing upstream. Which and since then they've actually completely caught up with everything that we wanted to achieve. They're so far ahead now that some of the things that we contributed or created specific plugins for have already been merged back into the core, and we can now ditch from our beta feature currently. Because this is a beta feature, you can go to the beta settings in Wikipedia and actually enable this new video player.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. What are some things? Is there anything that the new player can do that the old one can't do? I mean, from a user perspective.
Not really. Other than staying alive for the next 5 years.
Sure.
Right. No, not specifically, but there's some little things that are just going to be a lot easier. Like this has a much better abstracted user interface. So if we want to at some point, for instance, introduce an AirPlay button or a Google Android TV button, that's much more easier with this framework that we're going to be using now. And that's why we've chosen it. And also integrating these layers of the software codecs this is the first start, but basically trying to get back to feature parity. But in the future, the idea and the hope is that we can work on something where we can do the how do you call this, the HTTP live streaming, so that you get the right bit rate for your type of connection, which is something that was completely impossible. Well, no, which was something that was largely impossible with the old player,
right?
Or would have required a lot of work, and that is now at least an achievable goal at in the future. But other things, it sounds very simple, but we had to. I had to write a plugin to render subtitles for audio files, because apparently not many people in the world actually do this. It's a feature of the HTML5 video,
right?
But it seems like not many people in the world actually do this, or at least not in a generalized way. They either have very specific interfaces, like a karaoke interface or something.
Okay, yeah.
But they don't have it mixed with audio playback and video playback in a way that we do.
Right.
It was kind of surprising to me. Like, okay, so wait a minute, we have all these audio files which are subtitled for accessibility reasons, for people who have an impairment, where this actually helps them. And you'd think that many people in the world would be doing this, but apparently not so much. Many people either have the video,
right,
or they just do the audio, and it's not important enough to upgrade to video, so it's not important enough to do accessibility things either. It's really one of those areas where I was surprised by how the rest of the world does not care about this, and we apparently do care about this. So
yeah, well, I was going to say that's also true just for a fully open source video solution. Yes, it sounds like
true. I think that
Wikipedia is the real driver.
Yeah, I think that many open source products that are out there right now, they are also very heavily driven from the corporate industry, right? And
sure.
That basically gives them the same opportunities that corporate development has as well. And that means that if for a corporate reason you need to be accessible, for instance, which is very common, you implement accessibility. But if you can do that, then usually there's no reason why you cannot have a video instead of audio, right? And we are in a community where it has been very, there's much more moral pressure to take care of these things, but also because there's much more resource pressure, and because there's a lot of old material that we keep alive in our systems. It is something that in our projects we care a lot more about. Like I always compare it with this. Like if you have a piece of software, in many organizations it would not be uncommon to throw it away after 4 years. But we have a platform that has content it goes back 20 years, and the software needs to keep talking to all that content. So everything we do is much more long-term and much more also with that long-term vision. And I think there's that sort of changes the focus sometimes about what can be achieved in an open project versus a closed project, and a paid project versus a non-paid project. And this apparently is just one area where there was a bit of a disconnect between those areas.
How does paid versus non-paid affect this, other than just the amount of working hours you can devote to it?
For me personally,
yeah.
Well, it's quite simple. Work pays the bills, so that has priority.
Oh yeah, no, sure. I just mean you said that's the difference between a paid and unpaid project.
Right. I don't think it necessarily is a big change, but it gives you more opportunity to do certain things sometimes, but also more pressure to not do certain things if it doesn't create enough of a return value, right? And as sad as it is, but accessibility often is simply one of those things that does not create enough of a return value for many companies. So unless they're legally obliged by state law or federal law or something to make something accessible, then usually it's not. And even when they are accessible as a website, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've actually transcribed all their audio fragments. Because again, no monetary value in it, probably, which is incredibly sad, but it's the way many of these companies prioritize.
Right.
So you fall into that pitfall quite easily.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is really sort of getting out of the MediaWiki stuff, but I'm always surprised at how much closed captioning and stuff there is on videos on YouTube and Netflix and stuff like.
But like Netflix as well, they are required to have certain levels of subtitling for their content. They have federal laws that they need to abide with, and they've also actually made promises, right? They've actually Netflix in particular has made promises to certain NGOs about how much content they were going to provide with subtitles in their native language. And it has been also for them a very distinguishing feature compared to many other services that were already out there, and has allowed them to scale one type of content to multiple countries, for instance, with multiple languages.
Right.
So again, here they could use basically that money and that shared interest to create a value that was not there before, and it became part of their business model. But in many smaller, especially smaller companies, I think that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, right.
It's hard to recognize that value if you're not really focused on it.
Yeah, sure. Well, moving on from video, what other kinds of projects have you done for MediaWiki? I mean,
Oh, a long list. So yeah, I've done a lot of the CSS, JavaScript, and templates on English Wikipedia.
Oh, okay.
I've maintained the Common.css page and the Common.js pages, which are central hubs of extensions for English Wikipedia.
Sure.
For many years.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of template work as well, unifying different templates and making them more modern with more modern HTML, making them accessible. I've done one of the user scripts that I've worked a lot on is navigation pop-ups, which is a piece of software that shows you a small preview of an article of a link, which was a feature that was introduced on English Wikipedia via this user script already in 2005 or something. And actually, we have now a more mature production version of it on all wikis, which is page previews.
Right.
Which was created by the foundation as a sort of reader version that is production quality and long-term maintainable.
Yeah. But when navigation pop-ups is still the one that shows up when you're logged in, no?
Depends on your preferences. But For most people, it's the yellow. Oh no, it's not yellow anymore. It's actually white as well now, white and gray. But it's the one that also gives you multiple actions that you can take on you're an editor. And I also, so the video stuff, I've maintained parts of Wiki Editor, like the 2010 Wiki Editor, so not the modern ones, and also not the very bare bones one. I've worked a little bit on maps. Yeah. I've worked a little bit on graphs. Many things.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I've definitely talked to other developers who got their start doing doing stuff on Wikipedia or other Wikimedia sites, although they mostly stopped doing that when they got into, well, I guess when they were hired by the Wikimedia Foundation.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that's really neat. Yeah, I never knew who was behind all the CSS and JavaScript and everything else on Wikipedia.
It's a small group of several people. I think right now there's about 10 people who do most of that kind of work on English Wikipedia, and every language project actually has its own group of people doing that kind of work, which is also part of the scalability problem that goes with it. Like anything that English Wikipedia or German Wikipedia does is followed by maybe dozens of other wikis who copy our code or create variants of it that they use then in their language versions of wikis. But some of that stuff is that you can imagine if there's just two people maintaining just for a certain wiki project, two people leave at some point. So that continuity for those smaller wikis can be problematic. And the English Wikipedia, Commons, German Wikipedia, several other large wikis have been fortunate enough to have their own micro group of technical capable people maintaining those things for the rest of the community.
Yeah.
But a lot of small wikis don't.
Well, sure. So, as I mentioned, you're a volunteer developer, of course, which seems to be a dying breed, as all the volunteers get hired by the Wikimedia Foundation or Wikimedia Deutschland, etc. That seems to happen a lot in mature open source projects where the main organization takes over and starts hiring everybody. Is that about right? I mean, is that what's happening?
I think it's like in the end, it's very simple. Open source as an ideal is very nice, and as a hobby is also very nice. But once something starts to become very popular, and a lot of people depend upon it, it becomes harder to maintain something as like that as a hobby. So people need to have a job in the end of the day to get paid. And I think what you see is that a lot of these projects find ways to have their developers at least make some money. And whether or not that is via PayPal donations, so that they are basically freelance developers being paid through PayPal donations, or if it's starting their own company, or if it's joining another company.
Right.
I think it's only logical that at some point these projects find this kind of mode for their developers.
Yeah. Is there any chance you'll end up working for the Wikimedia Foundation?
There's this small internal joke that I'm the last volunteer they have not yet hired.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which is actually not true, by the way, because I think that Magnus Mansky, who has been with the project much longer than I have, has actually never done any paid work for the foundation, but I might be wrong on that.
Okay.
But at this point in time, I'm quite happy where I am, and I love doing this as a hobby. I've multiple times had conversations with Wikimedia Foundation and other people about maybe joining, and there's always been reasons why that did not develop for various reasons. But I'm not saying no ever, not ever. But at the moment there's no plan for that. But Last time you had a volunteer on your show, they were hired by the foundation a month later. So
yeah. Oh, I see. Well,
everything is possible.
Right. Well, he already knew he was going to be hired when I talked to him. So
I have no current plans to join either the foundation or Germany, the foundation Germany.
Okay. Well, this is something I've wondered about. Do you feel like the relationship to volunteer developers has changed over time? I mean, I don't want to start any drama, but do you feel like you're sometimes left out of conversations now that you should be part of, but people just forget about you for whatever reason?
No, if anything, I think I get pulled into more conversations than ever because I'm like I get the volunteer label, and we need to pull in a volunteer.
Oh, interesting. You fill the quota.
Yeah. And also because because I've been around fairly long, I know a lot of the history about many projects, right? So so for me personally, no. But I think what has changed is that the complexity of the projects, the quality of what we do at the foundation, for instance, has increased so much. And my personal ability to contribute time have decreased so much that it is very difficult to do a lot of work for me personally. But I also think that for newcomers, for instance, it's very hard to get on that, to jump on that bandwagon, right? The train has already left the station. It's a very big train, a very loaded train. It's not easy jumping on that. So I think that especially for newcomer volunteers, it can be very challenging to contribute. And we try to, I say we a lot because I always think in the movement, Wikimedia movement. I hate being labeled a contributor or a editor only or a reader only or a developer only.
Oh, okay.
And I also think that the foundation is part of everything we do. So I often say we.
Right.
But what we try to do in many ways is try to create smaller areas, smaller touch points for volunteers to start. And that can be extensions or like split off projects, like OUI, for instance, which is the new, not new, which is the interface toolkit that we are currently using to basically create smaller programs where volunteers can get started and get their feet wet. Because diving straight into MediaWiki core can be challenging. Like if you have a very isolated area where your functionality is very distinct and hopefully doesn't affect every single person using the website, then it still might be doable. But as soon as you are crossing multiple disciplines, going from a user interface to database performance and something else, like if creating a special page where we have this more specific functionality within MediaWiki, creating a special page can already be very daunting sometimes. You need to account for database performance and you need to get security reviews and you need an interface for it, and then you need to understand how to query the data, and that's not something that is easy to do if you have no experience with MediaWiki already. And that to many people that looks like a very small thing, to a very easy thing to get started with, but that whole ecosystem has become so vast, and the required knowledge of everything MediaWiki does, but also what it gets used for, has become so high that is, for most people, a very hard starting off point. And I think that we are even seeing that with enterprise wiki third-party contributors. Like it has taken a long time to increase the amount of contributions by enterprise MediaWiki developers. That has, I think, has similar reasons. Like that if you come with a certain goal to achieve, and all you encounter are basically roadblocks from your point of view,
right.
To achieve those goals, then it's very hard to show the perseverance required to contribute that code sometimes. So
yeah, I mean,
even if you're being paid, and
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, well, with Enterprise MediaWiki, we're lucky in that for the most part, the development work is on extensions that aren't used on Wikimedia projects. So
yeah. But I think that we're now starting to see a little bit of more contributions also to core software parts, for instance, from Enterprise MediaWiki users.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I tried to get a patch in. This was, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, to get Internet Explorer backwards compatibility in. It was a one-line thing, I believe, and it took a months, but it got in. They later took it out again, but yeah, it was exciting to.
Yeah, it takes me months as well, right? And I've been around for a long time. I sort of understand everything that goes on, but again, like I said, sometimes I pick these things that other people ignore, which is interesting for everyone else but me, because that means that I'm stuck trying to find a reviewer willing to dig his teeth into this area of the code that nobody has been touching for years. And here I am suddenly like, let me touch this. And can somebody review this, please? Well, nobody has touched this code in 6 years.
It's not that nobody has time. It's just nobody is qualified to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's usually like it's a little bit of everything. It's nobody has time. There's other priorities. Nobody actually knows anything about this area.
Right.
And then there's an error in the review, and I've already gone off on a 2-week break because I'm too busy with work, for instance, that I for 2 or 3 weeks don't do anything for MediaWiki or Wikimania, and then your patch is just sitting there for 3 weeks with needs improvement tag on it. And then after 3 weeks, I come back, and then I can start all over again with finding someone who will review my code.
Yeah. And that's how it takes 4 years, I guess, too.
That's how it takes 4 years. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Also, but like that was one of the areas where at some point I was also, I actually said, I'm not going to continue working on this for now until I get someone who will basically team up with me to get this through, because if something becomes so frustrating, and with frustrating I mean it has so many barriers, then it's not fun to work on anymore, and becomes very much a challenge to drag yourself behind that computer screen and do the next step. So at some point I said, like, I'm not touching it right now until someone helps me, and I basically said someone of the foundation helps me to get this through, because there's so many other things I could be doing that do bring me joy, which as a hobby, that's sort of the whole point.
Yeah, sure.
And that also create value for people. And at least then I'm getting somewhere. So I explicitly let that project stay dormant for almost a year at some point, because other things were moving and gave me more joy.
Right.
Just having it wait was a better option for me personally.
Yeah, you weren't getting any positive feedback from the project.
Well, yeah. Well, I was getting motivational feedback, but I wasn't getting enough of a speed in the project to make it an enjoyable experience, right?
So, changing topics somewhat. You've been on my list of people to interview for a while, but the reason I want to talk to you now is because Wikimania just happened in Stockholm, Sweden.
It did.
Yeah. For those who don't know, that's the big annual conference on all things Wikimedia related. I actually used to go pretty regularly to those, although I haven't been to one since the one in Washington, D.C. in 2012. I'm curious to hear what it's like from the perspective of a MediaWiki developer, although you would call yourself a MediaWiki everything, I guess, or a Wikimedia everything.
Yes. I'm a Wikimedian.
The Wikimedian, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, from the perspective of a technical Wikimedian, then I guess. I don't know. So how was the conference overall?
It was very enjoyable for me. It was nice to be in Stockholm. We had great weather, which always helps in my experience with a big event.
Yeah.
And there were some very nice sessions. I joined the hackathon, which we had before Wikimania.
Right.
Didn't get to actually. Well, I programmed one little thing for Internet Archive Bot, together with the maintainer of Internet Archive Bot, Cyberpower.
Oh, okay.
But other than that, I mostly talked to people.
Yeah.
Which is a common issue with hackathons. It takes, especially because I've been around for so long and I know so many of the people there. It takes like a day to say hi to everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Right.
And since there's 2 days of hackathon,
up. Yeah. Okay.
and because people wanted to do some I did some interviews with the foundation on upcoming features and all these kinds of things. It takes a lot of time. So at the end of the hackathon, I had spent maybe 4 hours working on other people's projects and 1 hour working on my own project. And in that 1 hour, I managed to write 6 lines of code, which were 2 empty functions.
I see. Sure. So that's 6 lines. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's actually not uncommon for me during hackathons, that it's so distracting, especially around Wikimania, because it's a short one. During the European hackathons, which take 3 days, I'm much more productive usually. And it's not like the other things I'm doing are not productive, right? It's a lot of exchanging of ideas and talking about future projects and doing so many things. I always say that the most productive part of a hackathon is the week after a hackathon. And actually for me it was as well this time. So after I got home from Wikimania, I actually wrote the thing that I wanted to write, which was I made some changes to the parser to recognize 360 degree spherical photos. So basically cool. Some of those photos where the picture has been taken 360 degrees around you.
Right. And
then to recognize those at the MediaWiki core level and create a special player for those photographs. And the player already existed, so it was just integrating it in the core part of it. So I did that after Wikimania, but I consider that as part of the hackathon because that's what I was thinking about most of the hackathon. Like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. And then not actually getting around to it. But
okay.
Right after that.
I mean, was that based on conversations that you had with people, or is it just like the hackathon provided the motivation, the impetus or something?
So it had actually been on my to-do list for a long while already to work on that. And I always try to find projects which are for a hackathon, which are realizable within a day-ish,
right.
Ideally. But even a day wasn't enough this time. Had to do it after the hackathon.
I don't think. Well, no, I was going to say I've never been to a Wikimania or Wikimedia hackathon, but I have actually. I know what that's like. It's
kind of
catching
interesting. Yeah, but it's kind of interesting because at Wikimania we have a lot more diverse, a sort of different crowd. than at the European hackathons, the larger hackathons that we usually have. So it's you see other parts of the user groups basically, and that's what makes it worth attending for me.
That's interesting. You talk to people who are more on the user side of things and hear their perspective. Yeah. That's cool. In terms of the conference itself, what were there any highlights you remember?
Let me see what I actually have the program here. So what I personally try to do at Wikimania, this was my 4th Wikimania. I've actually not done as many Wikimanias as I've done hackathons. I've done the Wikimedia hackathon since 2011 or something. On Wikimania, I've only done 4 of them. But I try to do the sessions that are not directly technology related, because of the technology stuff. Even though it's my bread and butter, it's also my bread and butter. I already know so much about it that and what goes on within the movement with it. Right. That I find it more valuable to look into different directions. So personally, I attended a couple of the research sessions, for instance. Which had some interesting talks. Didn't get to see all of them, of course, but I've especially found the one on dwell time was very interesting. Dwelling on Wikipedia, investigating time spent by global encyclopedia readers. So that just analyzed how much time people spend reading an article and before they navigate away. Like at what point do they navigate away? Those kinds of behaviors.
Yeah.
Another interesting one was they were actually most of those were actually in the same track. So characterizing reader behavior and characterizing Wikipedia citation usage. I found that very interesting. I like seeing a more research-driven content, and also especially when it's from outside of the foundation. Just getting a bit of more of an external view of what people think about us as a movement and us as MediaWiki. And that just helps me because I tend to be involved in so many things. I like the social aspect of development and what Wikipedia is and Wikimedia is, and it helps me better understand our editors and our readers, and all of that helps inform your decisions as a developer, right? So I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I mean, major sites like Facebook and Google and stuff do user tracking and have all this information, and can do a massive amount of data mining on all of that. But, for the Wikimedia sites, because there's the use of cookies and all of that, or...
very limited at least.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
and you much of it you cannot do if you're, especially for editors, for instance, because we're so protective of our privacy. It's much harder to do any sort of analytics, especially for external researchers. So they need assistance by the foundation to basically collect all that information in a way that is correct, basically. So it's much harder to get all that all those analytics and all that information. But it's good to see that at least it's happening right now. It took a long time before we got more detailed research into things that were not readers, because readers, it was much easier to do for researchers, right? So many of the research efforts tended to focus on the readers for that reason.
As opposed to editors.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But it seems that there's now much more infrastructure and processes in place for external researchers to also look at the editing side of things. So that was quite fascinating.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I didn't see. I don't know if the videos for those talks are available online, but
I think they're not yet available. They're coming because they were not live broadcasted. They're delayed and they will be published later.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll have links on the podcast page for the episode page for those two. I think it was 2 talks, and then people can see those, or see at least the pages for them.
Another thing that I participated in was the strategy session for product and technology.
Oh, you were part of it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, there were some draft recommendations by the working group that had been created, and I specifically actually was not part of that working group because I didn't think that I could dedicate the time to that. But I wanted to, as a long-term invested developer and user of Wikipedia, of course, I wanted to see what they were thinking and if that was going in the right direction. So, I decided to touch base with that as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I'll have a link to that talk also, or a
but
panel
that wasn't
or
actually
whatever.
a talk. That was a workshop. So I don't think.
Oh,
that was
okay.
But, there will probably. I think there's some links for that to published wiki pages that people can look up.
Yeah. It seems like there's a ton of Wikidata related talks now every year. It seems like a quarter or a third of all the talks are Wikidata related in some way. Did you go to any of those? Is that something that interests you?
Wikidata interests me, but this time around I didn't really go to any of the sessions.
Yeah. All right.
No,
just curious.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is quite notable actually how many Wikidata sessions there are.
Yeah.
I think you can really see that there's a lot of enthusiasm by very many people within both the Wikimedia movement, but also all the organizations and parties that either integrate with Wikimedia content or that want to use Wikimedia content in some way. And it's very also because I think because there's still so much to explore, right? So it's easier to create sessions on topics that are still so much in flux.
Sure.
There's so much left to discover and to probe an audience with, for instance.
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. That could be right. Yeah, it sort of reminded me of I went to the second Wikimania in Boston, and there was that. I mean, it just felt it felt like a very different conference than I think the current talks.
Oh, probably,
because, there's a lot that just hadn't been that needed to be decided, like and discussed and stuff. Cool. So, is there anything in any upcoming features in MediaWiki that you're excited about, whether you're involved with them or otherwise?
Well, of course, the VideoJS stuff.
Sure.
That for sure. There's some bigger things coming up. There's I actually attended a session on that as well. Some work going on possibly making some changes to the desktop skin.
Right.
Just bringing. Currently, we are using Vector, and just seeing if we can make a next step with either with Vector or with the mobile skin Minerva, or maybe bringing them closer together, and that is something that some of the teams one of the teams at the foundation is now exploring. So that will be interesting to see, but because that would be the first time in 9 years where we will actively actually change something to the interface, and which always is controversial.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Many changes actually are controversial.
Well,
it's one of the biggest problems in my point of view with trying to develop for the Wikimedia movement, is that everything is so complex and there's so many stakeholders and so many different opinions who all talk at the same time with different voices. It makes it very hard to do any sort of high-paced development effort that is creating sustainable software. And I think that also is the reason that the foundation, for instance, has so many problems trying to find the right way to make changes to the websites. But it will be very interesting to see what has been learned and what can change there. And you're seeing similar changes that are actually already coming up now in the mobile website, for instance, where they're going to be making many more of the contribution features available, which traditionally the mobile website has been much more reader focused and not so much on editors. And it's been something that the community has been asking about for a long time. And some of those things are now coming up, easier access to talk pages, more the recent changes in watch list being more aligned with the desktop watch lists and histories, those kinds of things. So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And another thing that I'm really curious about is some of the changes that might be coming to Wikitext.
Okay. Yeah.
So because of Parsoid and that now brought back into the core of MediaWiki, we've learned a lot about the parser, which traditionally has been sort of this black hole of complexity that we couldn't almost touch because we didn't know what the effects were. But because of Parsoid, we've now created so many tools and have so much more insight in what Wikitext actually is and how it works and what might break if we change something, that the developers have actually been considering making some changes to it. So that would be very interesting.
You're talking about stuff like the there was a talk at Wikimania about. Well, I've seen him talk about that before. What's his name?
Subu or C. Scott?
C. Scott. Yeah. About those. I can't remember the term, but bounded templates or something. Templates that guarantee that they're not affecting anything. Yeah.
Exactly. But one of the problems with MediaWiki with Wikitext as a language has been that when you use a template, it can start something, but it's not guaranteed to end in a place where you have balanced HTML as an output.
Right. Balance. That was the term. Yeah.
Makes it very difficult to round trip. So go from the Wikitext to the HTML and back in a way that is predictable. So they've been thinking about certain things like a here doc syntax, which people using PHP should be familiar with. But also the recent discussion about talk pages and how to improve them with Wikitext, because the larger projects with Flow and all these things have been thrown out by the user base, let's put it that way.
Right.
And basically been blocked forever now in terms of like that all those things have become so tainted that it will be very difficult to make any sort of progress there.
Yeah.
So instead, they're now looking back again at Wikitext to see how they can at least make some small improvements there. And solving some of that complexity with balanced templates, for instance, is required to do that, but also to actually defining what a section and a heading is and what it means, which is currently simply not well defined. and maybe making changes how a signature is added to a page. Those things are being looked at even from a Wikitext perspective now, and they're going to be doing some exploration, see what can work, what might not work. They've bounced some ideas already off the crowd at Wikimania, and that will continue. I mean, some of these things have already been talked about for years, actually, at multiple developer meetups. But they've always been sort of unattainable due to where we were with the parser. And now that much of that parser work is coming back in the core and we've learned so much, maybe those things will open up again and maybe there will be some changes.
Yeah, that's interesting that the parser was really the black hole that is the parser was holding up everything else.
Yeah. It's still not like if you would give it to someone who does like logical languages for computers, they will still look at you with disgust probably if you present them with Wikitext. It's the easiest language, but it's also a language that was very incrementally developed in a time where there were not many other, like it predated Markdown and many of these other simpler languages that have since developed. And it was also a language where we just slapped everything in it that people initially asked for. So it's very inconsistent, very complex. It has multiple nesting levels that you need to account for, and different behaviors depending on different contexts. It was really a complex. It's a really complex language, and that made it so difficult to do any sort of substantial changes to Wikitext. Because if you removed like a space character or a new line character being added by the parser or automatically after some type of content, people were relying on that, and it changing that would actually break existing pages. And since Wikitext is stored in a database table and cannot easily be modified, like old versions of it, it's actually quite difficult to make changes to this text, to this Wikitext.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could have a bot that goes through and fixes everything, but
you can't go through the old revisions. For instance.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's what you. Sure, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Gosh.
That's a big. This is a big issue.
Right.
So and that's something that like we've talked in the past about. Like, well, you could take all that content and then serialize it to HTML and then re-serialize it into a new Wikitext 2.0 or something. But even those things, like that's so much content. People don't really understand, I think, how big Wikipedia is sometimes. But you're talking about gigabytes and gigabytes of content.
Sure, tens of millions of pages.
90 gigabytes or something right now, just of Wikitext of the main article space of English Wikipedia or something. So to heavily modify that and write it back in the database and have the code deal with old versions and new versions of it, and it would be a gigantic project. In the order of Visual Editor, which took 8 years.
Well, we have a deadline then.
Yep.
8 years from now. Great. Well, we covered a lot of stuff. That was very interesting. I think that's it for this episode. Thank you, Derk Jan, for coming on the program. It was great talking to you.
No problem. I love being here.
This has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, the volunteer developer Derk Jan DJ Hartman. Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.